Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to some more Rome 2 Total War. So the individual who is, the viewer who is saying that I should play a little bit more Rome 2, asked me to do a commentary for some of the playthroughs that they've done, and that's what that little icon is at the top. It's because they've got a channel of their own. I won't be putting this up, I'm not joining them or anything, so this is just going to be when I get replays from that little particular group, especially if they do like tournaments or something like that. I would love to do some commentaries for tournaments, practice that just a little bit. It's not something I have any experience in, but anyway, let's get into this replay here. As you can see, it's a 3v3, which is always interesting to watch, but never to play. We've got Tylus, Scythia, and Suebi on the one side, and we've got Massalia, Pergamon, and Rome on the other. We've got pretty unbalanced factions here, in my opinion. A little bit... I don't like Massalia or Pergamon all that much. Rome is, of course, extremely powerful and a good thing to rely on. Tylus is extremely good, and Suebi's got some interesting yet cheap tricks that they can pull out of their sleeve that makes it so that they're very, very hard to fight against. So, a Suebi rush army is kind of bullshit in this game. There are ways to counter it, but a lot of people don't seem to know how to. Anyway, let's get into this match here. We'll talk a little bit about each of the armies as we sort of pan across them. And it's a fairly long match, so we'll be talking about those armies as we go along here. So, yeah, if anyone else has like video replays for these sorts of games that they would like me to commentate over, I think that'd be pretty good practice for me. I can't guarantee that I'll get through very many of them, but I definitely wouldn't mind doing that. So, I'm not playing this one, in case you're wondering. Anyway, we've got over here are the Tylus faction. They've got a strong front line of these tribal warriors, one of my favorite units in terms of just pure stats, although I absolutely hate them in terms of the balance of the game. They've got Thracian warriors, a shock-type unit in second line. I actually would have preferred them in front. They would have just been sacrificial. They're fairly cheap. They're not that cheap, but they're kind of cheap. You've got the Guild of Thracian infantry, a decent mid-range unit, not specialized in anything in particular. Then they've got the Celtic warriors, cheap throwaway unit. He's got nothing but swords. He's got some Oathsworn back here. He's got an entirely sword army, which is why he's got some of these very cheap swords. I would have liked to see these Celtic warriors replaced with cheap spear units. They work better at cheap values. Up along with him, he's got half of the Scythian army, who have these Amazonian riders, and some shock cav. They've got steppe noble lancers. They've actually taken 6 of these, and then they've got a bunch of Scythian royal horse. They've got 4 of those. So a very, very strong horse component being taken by one player, and then all infantry taken by both of the others. Over here we've got the Suebi. They've got 3 units of slingers. This is just to clear out any pikes if he happened to have run across a pike box. He's got Bloodsworn, which have a very good charge, actually, but they're very cheap. They've got very crappy stats otherwise. Behind them, they've got Swordmasters, 4 units of those. They've got 6 of the Bloodsworn, by the way. He's got 3 of these Club Levy, a very, very cheap throwaway unit. And he's got 3 of these Woodness Spears. Very, very solid spear unit, especially for a light spear unit. It's fairly fast moving, fairly decent defensive stats despite that, even 50 armor, which is quite good for a very light unit. They've also got pretty decent offensive capability. They're not the best counter to cavalry, in my opinion, but they're pretty okay at it. And his Club Levy have been sort of spread around here. Here's the other half of the Scythians. Over here we've got Massalia. Massalia, I think, has a very awkward army for what their strengths are. He's got a couple of these Thurio spears, and he's using them very, very far forward considering he's up against Massalia. I'm saying they're too far forward just because the Thurio spears are basically a ranged skirmishing unit. They've got a ton of javelins, but they're not particularly good at defeating cavalry. Their defensive stats, their bracing, and so on and so forth just aren't there, and they don't have the expert charge defense capability, whereas we're to go over to these guys over here. They've got the bracing capability through the spear wall. Thurio spears have to go into square being kind of crap. But anyway, you can see Massalia moving up. He's got 2 Thurio spears. He's got a couple of units of hoplites. He's got 5 units of these thorax swordsmen, which I think are really crappy. He's got 2 units of axe warriors, which again I think are not very good. So he's just got lots of very not effective units, in my opinion. He's got some mercenary Gaelic hunters. These are actually quite excellent. They've got stealth. They've got fairly powerful ranged attacks. So the problem is that they're not particularly well defended here. His cavalry component is some Tarentines and some skirmisher cav, backed up by some citizen cav and his general, of course, as well as the Hippeus Lancers. Not exactly what I would call a very solid cavalry component for Massalia. I actually would have liked to have seen a very strong cavalry showing from Massalia. That's probably how I would have played it, along with the skirmish ground component, backed up by some hoplites. That, I think, would have been what would would have worked out well for them. Here we've got the Roman player. He's got 2 units of these Syrian archers. He's got a bunch of equites. I think that this is a really, really bad choice for cavalry here. He's got some hastati. They're just being used as a screen against the Suebi player here, and to guard sort of against the sort of flank of the Tylus player. And then he's got a bunch of units of these veteran legionaries, a very good, solid unit. You're going to see that the Roman player is going to misuse his army quite badly, though, and that's going to be what ends up costing him. Lastly, we've got Pergamon. Pergamon I don't like as a faction against... in a 3v3, I would never take Pergamon. This is just because it's too easy for your forces to get enveloped from multiple sides and to have to cover much more frontage, because you never know what's going to happen on your flank. And especially against Tylus, I don't think he's particularly well suited against that. You see that he's got these Gemma Spears. They're actually a fairly powerful spear unit. They've got expert charge defense. They've got Square, unfortunately, as opposed to that. They've got Inspire, and they've got actually the ability to chuck spears. So they're not a bad spear unit, but what they are is a spear unit. They will still lose against a sword rush army. His center is pikes. Over here he's got more of those Gemma spears, and he's got some Galatian swords, and he's got 5 units of slingers, more Gemma spears in his backline. He's actually taken an outright spam of them practically. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's got 8 Gemma spears, 9 Gemma spears. That's just too many of a spear unit. So what is wrong with this is that if his flank gets attacked heavily by Tylus over here, he can sort of just move his way down the line here against him and ignore these pikes almost completely. He's got enough sword units that could easily do it, and you know, if he's simultaneously attacking a little bit at these Gemma Spears, he could easily punch through all that with his units that he's brought here. The tribal warriors are more than capable of hitting Gemma Spears and taking them out, although, you know, he's only got 4 of them, so he can't hit that many of them. The other units that he's got here, the Thracian warriors, are okay and will do pretty well against the Gemma Spears as well. It's just so long as he doesn't charge into the front of the pikes, keeps them busy with something, he'll be fine. He has moved over 4 of his units of Gale Thracian infantry to assist in this fight over here. There, you can see some little derpy bits going on over here, just as the Scythians get kind of encircled just a little bit. Rome needed to not pull out there, I don't think. The Scythian Royal Horse, I mean, it can probably defeat 3 units of the Equites. They're just so bad. The Hastati are also in there. And, you know, with Tylus moving these guys over here, honestly, what I would have done as Pergamon, I would have moved up my Gemma Spears, moved it in front of the Roman lines, and I would have moved the rest of my army to guard the Roman right flank. I wouldn't have actually even used all of them. I would have stretched them out across there with, like, 4 units, perhaps, and used them as a deflection against the charge bonuses Bloodsworn. Because I know exactly what these Bloodsworn are planning on doing, what he's planning on doing with this Suebi force, and he's going to punch straight through this Roman army, and you'll see that happening. Now, he is using Hastati as a screen, and that's smart in its own way, but he needed to do it with more units, and Hastati don't make a very good screen. Units punch through them very, very easily. Over here, you can see the Massalia player has done a very, very bad job of advancing up. He's just now moving up his Thorax swords, and he needed to just move up very, very rapidly with his entire army. If he had gotten his entire army up here before this Tylus player had gotten these reinforcements over to the side, he could have easily been at the flanks of the Suebi player. If he was at the flanks of the Suebi player, it would have been something that would have prevented the Roman player from getting charged quite badly. And of course, the Roman player is also facing off against the entire Suebi line. He's missing a good chunk of his army. I would say that a third of his army is tied up in this fight against the Thracians and the Scythians that are over here. You can see that the Scythians on this flank have been mostly mopped up, but that still leaves the Scythians over here who are now pulling in for a complete YOLO charge against the front of the Romans. The Romans in position here actually should have been able to withstand this charge pretty well, but like for some stupid-ass reason, he countercharges with these Hastati, and like he could have had the bracing bonus, he could have had the pylum much, much better off. Like, he got only about half the pylum off against these guys, and he got absolutely devastated on the charge here. He's lost about half the unit of Hastati. If he had kept them stationary, he still would have gotten the pylum. I don't know if he knew that or something. And, like, if he just let them stand there braced, he could have then used the veteran legionaries just as impromptu javelin men throwing into those steppe noble lancers, and they would have killed a lot more of those steppe noble lancers doing it that way. Cavalry charges in for no good reason whatsoever. Just, they aren't even in the fight because they're behind the enemy, essentially. Got Draco from the enemy I think that must have been the Royal Scythians have that, yeah. So that's going to reduce the cavalry fighting capability of all of these units. And here comes the Suebi. They've got their weird little bonus that they get from their general. There's a unique general trait that the Suebi have that makes them much, much more deadly on the charge. Here you can see the Bloodsworn just charging in, taking that javelin volley to the face there. But now that they're in melee, you know, they pile in with that reckless charge bonus. They get a lot of kills for how cheap they are against a much, much superior unit. So they take the javelins, they're a cheap unit, they're an expendable unit, they've got a high charge bonus, and they've got 30 kills against a much, much superior unit. I mean, these guys have killed more than they've lost against veteran legionaries, and that's not something that you want to see as the Roman player. He's followed through with the Sword Masters, and of course with the Woodman Spears, might as well. And this charge combination from Suebi, if it's uninterrupted, is devastating. If the Roman player had been a little bit more on the ball, he could have actually moved his Equites units in front of the Bloodsworn, caught them up on that charge, and if they had lost the charge bonus, the veteran legionaries would have a very, very easy time cleaving their way through all of these Bloodsworn. There would have been no problem whatsoever defeating them. But as it is, the veteran legionaries have been so battered by that charge that they're actually going to go down. While this is happening, Tylus is starting to move across the flanks, trying to get behind the Pergamon player. This one unit, I think, got caught on a movement order into these units of Agema Spears, so that's going to actually be pretty bad for them. They're fighting against 2 units of Agema Spears. They're doing actually a pretty good job of getting kills, per se, but they are going to lose quite a lot of these tribal warriors just to these Agema Spears. I think also they took a lot of pylon volleys and didn't get a charge, so I think he's also trying to use pull-through, but he's not very committed to it. Don't use pull-through, guys. Like, it's just not good. Over here, one of the other tribal warriors tries to go for these Agemas. He made a mistake here. You don't want a spaghetti line all the time. Like, everyone always says you might as well have... Like, it's a thing people do. People just have their units in long, thin lines. It gets called spaghetti lines. I think that's because of Maximus Decimus Radius or something like that. Calls it that. But you don't want them always in that formation. If he had gotten them condensed enough that they could go through the gap and get these Agema Spears, that would have been much better. Instead, he got a third of the unit caught on these pikes. They're going to get killed doing very, very little. They are chewing up these pikes just a little bit from the flanks here, but this unit's winning decisively, and this unit is getting their ass kicked because they now count as being attacked from the rear because this unit's to their rear technically. This Agema Spear also attacking them in the rear, so it's just not good for that unit of tribal warriors, that angle of attack. And again, he's coming in his Celtic warriors as wide as possible. He's going to be fighting like 3 units of Agema Spears with that one unit. Not actually a good thing necessarily. It's not necessarily bad, but it's really bad when one of those units is a pike that you've been caught on frontally. Over here, Rome's been completely cleaned up, and you saw that coming. The Bloodsworn, in fact, are still alive. And that is the thing that is, like, really tragic. Over here, Massalia has finally started marching towards the main conflict. His units have gotten really separated from the fight. Like, the Thorax Swordsmen are way back there for no reason whatsoever. He should have moved to assist way, way earlier. Rome is now trying to retreat past him. He's got a couple Thorax Swordsmen in melee here, but they're not doing anything useful here. Bloodsworn down to 39 men, but they're still holding on. Swordmaster's over here doing an extremely good job of hanging in there. His Payas Lancers are almost dead, down to 26 men, and they've only got 110 kills. Well, I shouldn't say only. 110 is pretty okay, but Payas Lancers should be able to rack up things like 200, 300 kills. Got hoplites coming in, sort of a last-ditch charge into these Suebi units. The Suebi units no longer have got the benefits from those abilities that they were using earlier. You can see that they've activated things like counter horse tactics, counter cavalry tactics. They've got shield wall up on the Swordmasters. That's going to let them last in this blob for a lot longer. It would have been nice to see the Thorax Swordsman also hitting shield wall. It would have helped them out in this fight quite a bit. Over here, Tylus sort of throwing the last little bits into the front of these pikes, not necessarily going to do much other than stop them from reforming, which is still pretty good in its own right, but you can see that this fight has sort of devolved into 2 separate fights. There's the one over here between Tylus and Pergamon, and a couple of the Suebi units in there as well, and then there's over here just Pergamon versus Tylus, and Tylus is just going to get slowly picked away because they've got inferior units here. Galatian swords are going to lose pretty badly against an Oathsworn, although that, you know, to be expected. Oathsworn cost a lot more. The Agema Spears, on the other hand, are going to slowly get chipped away by these Celtic Warriors, which are a very slow to kill unit. Like, these guys are bad. They're not a good unit. But they've also got the last bits of these Tribal Warriors. Like, these three very battered units that are kind of crappy are going to be able to take out the remaining Agema Spears, if I recall correctly. Over here, this unit of Celtic Warriors is so bad and so battered that they're going to lose to the Agema Spears over here. But the Oathsworn are coming in as well. Again, spaghetti line, so they're going to clip this unit, and that's going to mess up their movement. And you're going to see that they're not very much in the fight because of that. Over here, Pergamon boxed up a little bit. It's going to make it a little bit easier for them to try and withstand the Tylus attack here, but it's just too little too late. He should have started off in a much more condensed formation. If he had both sets of his units in a better support position, he could probably have done a lot better here. Over here, the remainder of Rome is going to get cleaned up by these Swordmasters. There's nothing that these units of Roman units can do, really, to defeat Swordmasters, especially in the condition they're in, and with so little of the Roman army remaining alive. Those Swordmasters are going to be able to break them very, very quickly, and that's indeed what happens. I still think that the Roman units, I'm surprised that they broke on those sort of numbers. Usually the general being gone and your army being gone doesn't affect Roman units quite as strongly as others because of the discipline ability, but either way. Over here, it's looking like Massalia is going to be taking it. You know, it looks like this fight is Massalia's. And you're going to see a lot of waver and a lot of fleeing from the Bloodsworn. But once the Bloodsworn are off the field, nothing else is going to leave the field. The Swordmasters over here are going to stick around. They're in shield wall. They're dying very, very slowly. They've got really good kills on them. You've got 117 on that unit. You've got 76 on this one. That's actually not great, but they're going to be slowly cleaving through these Thorax Swordsmen. This one around... You can see that these Massalians now, it looks like they should be able to beat them quite easily. The Bloodsworn over here, fleeing over here. Thorax Swordsmen are able to surge over into the rear of these Bloodsworn over here, causing these guys to rout and shatter. And that gets him into the back of this blob, and that means that it would look like he's got an advantage because of this. To counter that, you know, the Swordmasters come in, get to the rear of this Massalia blob. The Hoplites try to move out of it. They should have actually disengaged one of these Thorax Swordsmen way, way earlier. Countercharged those Swordmasters way before they had gotten to this point. This unit's not doing anything in here anyway. He's using Shield Wall finally with a couple of these units, although I don't think he's using it with all of them. Over here, I mentioned sort of that it was the Tylus player surrounding that blob there, and that was too late. You can see over here the results of it. He's completely lost that little box. Again, it wasn't a complete box. He hadn't done it early enough. So once the Oathsworn had punched through one of the units, that was basically it for them. Nothing too unpredictable about that. And over here, this is where the sort of main, like, nonsense happens. This is where I was just like, okay, well, you know, maybe Massalia will pull out a little bit and get through a couple of the units and then, you know, lose to Tylus. But instead, what we actually start seeing is the Massalian player completely losing all his units. They're going to start routing over here. That's going to get these Swordmasters into the back of these Thorax Swordsmen. The Massalia player cannot break these Wooden Spears who are in shield screen, or these Swordmasters who are in shield wall. Their morale and their killing power is just too high, and in fact you start seeing these Thorax Swordsmen who should be able to win here start to break. The Axe Warriors over here are also getting chewed up and their morale starts to falter. Over here the Thorax Swordsmen rout off the field, and that's the entire Massalia army there. So a lot of critical mistakes from the Massalia, Pergamon, Rome side, especially from Rome. Like, Rome's mistake was very easy to make, but it was the most, by far, crucial one to this sort of result. If he had held his units and just stood there and let his Stati absorb the charge, they would have been much, much better off. If he had just let his veteran legionaries just chuck their spears at those units while they were standing there, he would have been much better off. He would have killed a lot of that cavalry off. He even potentially would have had some units left over to screen against that Bloodsworn charge. And if the Bloodsworn charge doesn't do a devastating amount of work, then you're typically going to see the Roman player pull through in the end, even against those really good units like the Swordmasters, if he's got enough units to sort of push against those Swordmasters and grind them down. And that's not what happened. He broke almost immediately. And a couple of the other problems were, like, these Axe Warriors, Thorax Swordsmen. Massalia just did not bring a very good army. So that is pretty much the entire match here. Let's just speed up the last little remnants there. And let's take a look at some of the stats here. So we can look at Tylus over here. The Oathsworn did a very, very good job, 198 and 257 kills, and they were actually fighting things like pikemen. Even frontally, I know that this unit of Oathsworn was actually fighting a unit of pikes frontally. These ones were trashing a Gamma Spears. A lot of kills against fairly decent units, fairly hard to kill units. These enemies killed on the Guild Alteration Infantry is extremely variable. Most of what they ended up killing was routing units, or units that were close to routing, or ranged units when they caught up in those. Nothing really happened from those Thracian warriors. They did very, very poorly, but they never got off any clean charged targets. They had nothing really to charge anyway. And the tribal warriors did extremely variably. This is the one that got clipped onto the pikes. Basically killed nothing. This one was the one fighting two Gemma Spears. Did okay. Honestly, he could have done much, much better with that unit. The other two did about what I would have expected the tribal warriors to be able to do. I think they got cleaner charges off. Moving on to the Scythian player, he did very little, and this is sort of the problem with the style of army. He did end up killing a lot of the cavalry, but that wasn't really something he did more of, in my opinion, than the others. So, just there wasn't much cavalry to kill anyway, other than like the Hephaeus Lancers and Equites, and Equites are easy to kill for anything, so it doesn't really matter that they were killing that. The Scythian player is just so pigeonholed in role and had such a hard time finding good targets that the best thing he did was disrupt Rome, even though he didn't get very many kills. I think that I wouldn't want to play someone like Scythia in a 3v3. It just I think there's too much stuff that can counteract them. We've got the Swaby over here. A lot of kills on a lot of these Swordmaster units. One of them did a little bit more poorly than the others. His slingers did okay, considering how cheap they are. Dramatic slingers not the expensive variety. His Bloodsworn got a lot of kills, considering that they're not very expensive infantry units, especially considering what they're fighting. Club Levy did crap, but they're expected to, and Wooden Spears did pretty well for all of them. Moving on to the others, Massalia actually got the most kills, but what they actually were killing, if you're paying attention, was mostly Bloodsworn, who had already wasted their really good charge against the Romans. So they didn't have much left in the tank when they came in to fight against Massalia. So those Thorax Swordsmen and Thurio Spears and Hoplites managed to do a very good job cleaning up those Bloodsworn. That's what a lot of those kills are. The Hoplites did fairly poorly. The Axe Warriors, same reason, they were mostly just fighting off these Bloodsworn here. Mercenary Gaelic Hunters, I would have liked to have seen higher kill counts on these guys. They can definitely pull those off, but 93, 53, 57, those aren't terrible numbers considering that they're firing at cavalry. They're mostly firing at these Amazonians, so that's not that necessarily that bad. Hephaeus Lancers got 119 kills. What's impressive is the Tarentine Cavalry, although I think they were being used to run down skirmishers. Can't really remember for sure. I wasn't paying too much attention to them. The Skirmisher Cavalry similarly got a lot of kills. Citizen Cavalry, pretty much nothing. You don't expect much out of them anyway. The General didn't really do very well. Massalian Cavalry is not necessarily that good either. So, Thurio Spears pretty much did nothing. They were completely a waste. Pergamon, I mean, he had some really good units and they had some really crappy units. He had one pike unit that got 89 kills, for example. I believe they were fighting Celtic warriors from the front. Then he's got some of these Gemma Spears with over 100 kills, and then he's got some that have 16. It really mattered how that angle of engagement was working for them. Some of them, they got really good ones. Some of them got really crappy ones. Galatian Swords, if he had taken a lot of these, I could see that potentially working. They're a decent unit. They're not really something I think that could stand up against Tylus. The Slingers, considering how cheap they are, again, not bad. His general, also not bad. But I definitely feel like this was a dysfunctional army to choose. The Romans, Equites, practically nothing out of them. General and bodyguard, you don't expect your general to get many kills. As the Romans, these auxiliary Syrian archers, very, very few kills considering how expensive they are. This is a very expensive premium skirmishing unit. Hastati are a screening unit. You don't necessarily want them to be getting, well, you don't take them so that they can get kills. Of course, they do get them. That's great. But personally, I would have replaced them with something like auxiliary spears. They would have had that sort of ability to absorb the charge a little bit better, more efficiently. They've got the veteran legionaries. Some of them did actually quite a lot of killing. Again, I think they were mostly killing Bloodsworn, but there are plenty of Bloodsworn left after the veteran legionaries had all died, so it's hard to tell exactly what they're killing. But, when you're not getting really, really high numbers against those kind of crap units, you're probably in trouble with Rome. You definitely need to have higher numbers coming out of these sorts of guys. And they just got wiped off the field so fast that the fact that they're doing really, really poorly with the other half of the army really came around to bite them in the ass. So anyway, that's a match of this. If you want to send in some replays for me to commentate over, that would be great. I'm not sure the best way for you to do that, but I hope you found this one enjoyable. And of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.